She called me homeless, right there in front of Atlanta's elite, at her $8 million charity gala. What Samantha didn't know was, she was standing in my building. Hi, I'm Avery Collins. For years, I was the sister who kept quiet, the one they left off the guest list, the one they smiled past like I was furniture. But that night, I stepped onto the stage, held up the deed, and watched her perfect world unravel. Want to know how we got there? Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I didn't expect to be seen. Not really. And certainly not like that. As I stepped through the arched entrance of the Whitestone Pavilion, I could already feel the weight of the place pressing down. Amber uplights traced the walls like stage lighting, warming the high ceilings and the white-paneled trim that gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Guests moved gracefully through the space, women in long gowns sipping chilled rosé, men in navy or black tuxedos with matte lapels. Everyone sparkled, except me. There was no valet acknowledgement when I arrived, no name tag waiting at check-in. The woman at the welcome table asked me twice to spell my name, then finally flipped to the back of the list and pointed to a printed pass labeled General. She handed it to me with a polite smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and motioned toward the far corner of the room where extra chairs had been placed. No assigned table, no placard with gold foil. I found a spot and folded my hands neatly in my lap, trying not to wrinkle my dress. Navy, simple, the same one I wore to a friend's engagement dinner last fall. It was the kind of outfit that didn't ask for attention, which normally would have been fine. But this time, I was in Samantha's world, and in her world, invisibility was a kind of crime. She made her entrance with timing only someone practiced in the art of performance could master. The music dipped, conversation softened, and then came the sound of applause. My sister didn't walk. She glided, hair pinned in a sleek twist, ivory satin gown hugging her like a second skin. Her smile flickered perfectly as she waved, pausing just enough to be captured by the camera flash that followed her. When she reached the podium, the room exhaled, expectant. "Thank you all for making tonight's gala our largest yet," she began, voice rich with practiced warmth. "When I started the Collins Women's Initiative 3 years ago, I had no idea we'd come so far." I watched from the shadows as she moved through her speech with ease, acknowledging donors, partners, and city officials. Then, out of nowhere, her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. Her smile twitched just slightly, and then there it was. "Even my little couch surfer sister made it tonight," she said lightly to laughter. "Avery, stand up. No? Okay, stay mysterious. That's your thing, right?" People turned. Some laughed politely. Others looked at me the way one glances at someone who spilled water at a wedding. Mild pity, vague amusement, but mostly relief that it wasn't them. I smiled, tightly. I nodded once and stayed seated. My cheeks burned, but I kept my spine straight. I didn't give her the reaction she wanted, and yet, deep down, something inside me pulled back like a tide leaving the shore. Later, at dinner, the table I'd been placed at was near the wall, close to the waitstaff entrance. My chair wobbled slightly. The centerpiece, a glass bowl of floating candles, was cracked at the rim. I ran my fingertip along it absent-mindedly, thinking of nothing and everything. As dessert plates were cleared, I noticed Samantha's assistant at a nearby table lift her phone and snap a picture. She didn't try to hide it. Her phone screen glowed briefly. I caught a glimpse of the photo as she tapped out a caption. I checked my phone under the table. The image was already online. Homeless chic? The comment section was small but lively, a few laughing emojis. One yikes, another. Is that her sister? I slid the phone face down and reached for my glass of water. It trembled slightly in my hand. I stayed until the end. It felt important to stay, though I couldn't have said why at the time. I nodded goodbye to a few guests on my way out. Most didn't nod back. Outside, the air was cool. Spring in Atlanta always brings a mix of old pollen and new promise. I wandered past the parking lot, heels clicking lightly on the stone path until I reached the far garden. It was quieter there, empty, the kind of quiet that carried a weight of its own. I found the low stone wall at the edge of the lawn and sat down carefully, smoothing my skirt. Just across from me, half hidden behind a flowering dogwood, stood a bronze plaque mounted on the outer pavilion wall. I walked to it slowly. Its inscription was simple: the Whitestone Pavilion, dedicated to growth, grace, and legacy. I traced the raised letters with my finger, feeling the cool metal under my skin. There was no mention of our family name, no signature, just that: growth, grace, legacy. I looked up and caught my own reflection in the tall glass window beside the plaque. My outline was there, distorted slightly by the angle of the light. I looked ghost-like, faint, transparent, not part of the celebration inside, not quite real, a shadow standing on the outside watching. Maybe that's how they saw me, a reflection, not a presence. I turned and started walking toward the front gate, heels quieter now, my hands buried deep in the folds of my coat. Halfway down the path, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, no preview. I hesitated, then tapped it open. You should know who owns Whitestone. Meet me tomorrow. That was all. No name, no instructions. But somehow I knew I was going to answer it. Not just the message, the moment. You can erase someone's name from a guest list, but not from a deed. That thought sat with me as I rode the elevator to the 8th floor of a glass-paneled building downtown. The ride was quiet, just me and my reflection, staring back from brushed metal. Malik's office was tucked behind a frosted door that read, Office of Public Trust and Oversight, Southern Region. Inside, the space felt clinical. Cool gray walls, chrome fixtures, and no signs of personal decoration. Just one tall ficus leaning toward the window and the rhythmic click of a ceiling vent. He greeted me with a nod, his voice steady. Ms. Collins, thanks for coming. I sat across from him, my palms pressed to my knees to keep them from fidgeting. His desk was organized, spare. Only one manila folder lay open, a few pages inside. He turned it toward me. This came across my desk 6 days ago. It's dated September 2019. Witnessed, notarized, and filed through a private attorney's office. I'm assuming you've never seen it. I leaned forward slowly. My name was right there. Avery Collins, listed as sole beneficiary to a parcel titled Whitestone Pavilion and Grounds, Atlanta County, Georgia. The seal was intact. The signature, Franklin J. Collins, my father. I didn't speak. Not at first. Malik continued, It wasn't submitted as part of an estate-wide transfer. It was filed separately, discreetly, before his health declined. It's legally binding. I let my finger rest on the edge of the document. The weight of it settled over me like a wool coat. I felt cold, then warm, then nothing. He never told me, I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He told me stories, not this. Malik nodded slightly. Sometimes stories carry more truth than documents, but documents hold up in court. My thoughts drifted backward without meaning to a crisp fall afternoon in Grant Park, 4 years earlier. Dad and I had gone to an outdoor art fair. He wasn't as mobile then, moved slower, but insisted on going anyway. He liked to linger at the booths without buying anything, telling the artists their color palettes reminded him of 1970s album covers. He'd worn his brown scarf and the battered corduroy blazer with elbow patches that made him look like a professor. We stopped by the lake where the leaves had started to scatter across the water's edge. I remember him reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a small notepad, the kind with a spiral on top. "You ever wonder," he asked, "what it would feel like to make something they couldn't take away?" I blinked, caught off guard. Like what? Something with your name on it, not mine, not the family's, just yours. I laughed. I don't think I have anything worth naming after me. He looked out at the water for a moment, then back at me. That's why I want you to have something. Something no one can strip from you, not with words, not with charm, not even with influence. I hadn't understood then. I thought it was one of his metaphorical wisdoms, but he hadn't been speaking in riddles. He'd been preparing me. Back in the present, I stood in front of the Whitestone's rear staff entrance, brass key in hand. The building manager met me by the utility door. He looked to be in his 60s, glasses sliding down his nose, clipboard in one hand. "You're Franklin's daughter," he said simply. "I am." He glanced down at the clipboard. "I've seen your name before. In the internal records. Most folks don't look at those, but I always double-check when permits get updated. You're listed as primary owner on file since 2019. I wasn't aware of that," I said. "Well, nobody told me otherwise. I just assumed you knew." He opened the door and let me into a dim hallway lined with cleaning supply closets and electrical panels. The floors were concrete, polished smooth but still echoey. The kind of hallway where truth doesn't dress up. It just exists. "This hallway leads to the records room. It's not much," he said, "but your dad liked keeping backups there." I thanked him and waited until he was out of sight before walking the length of the corridor. Everything smelled faintly of lemon wax and old books. The storage cabinet at the far end took the key with a slight resistance, then clicked open. Inside sat a small black box with a silver hinge. I pulled it out gently, then placed it on a folding table nearby. Inside were two things: a folded letter with my name on it and a small brass pin shaped like a laurel wreath, the kind worn by board chairs during dedication ceremonies. I didn't know what the pin meant yet, but the letter was unmistakably his handwriting. Avery. They'll never give you credit. That's why I did. Not because you needed validation, because I wanted you to have freedom. Freedom lives in quiet places, not headlines. You don't owe anyone noise. You just owe yourself the truth. This place is yours. Use it the way I hoped it would be used. And if it ever gets loud, let that be the sound of justice, not revenge. Love, Dad. I read it once. Then again. The words didn't blur. They burned in the best way. For a long time, I stood there, hands on the edges of the letter, chest full and somehow empty at once. Then I looked down at the key again. That simple brass thing, curved from use, edges smooth from age. I held it up to the flickering light above the table. I knew what it opened now, and more importantly, I knew what it unlocked inside me. Families lie, wealthy families rehearse it. That thought lingered as I pulled into the circular drive of the Collins estate in Buckhead. Everything was curated, from the just-watered rose bushes lining the walkway to the identical black sedans parked with precision near the valet stand. I hadn't been invited. I came anyway. I stepped out of my car slowly, adjusting my jacket and glancing once at the mirror. The suit was neutral, pressed, forgettable. A few guests near the entrance glanced my way. Their expressions were polite but not warm, like they'd spotted someone out of context. A woman leaned into her husband, lips barely moving. He didn't react, just sipped his drink. Inside, the scent of lilac and fresh pastries filled the air. Classical strings played softly overhead, and soft sunlight poured through oversized windows, illuminating the long buffet table stacked with quiches, smoked salmon, fresh berries, and tiny jars of yogurt layered with honey. Near the grand staircase stood a white easel with gold-embossed calligraphy, Collins Women's Circle, Empowerment Brunch. That word, empowerment, landed sharp in my chest. I spotted Joanne first. My mother sat at a corner table beneath the chandelier, fingers wrapped around a mimosa stem, posture still as ever. She wore one of her pearl shoulder blouses, the kind that always made her look like she was part of the decor. Her eyes landed on me for half a second before drifting away, as if I'd been a draft of cold air. I greeted a woman I vaguely remembered from one of Dad's old advisory boards, offering a small smile. She returned it stiffly. Around me, conversations dipped. The ripple effect of my presence moved like oil over water. Quiet. Unmistakable. Then came Samantha. She appeared near the top of the stairs, descending like someone who knew she'd be photographed. A coral-sheath dress hugged her frame, her heels clicking perfectly with each step. Her hair was knotted into a clean bun. A publicist hovered just behind her, tablet in hand. Samantha's smile brightened when she reached the final step, and when she saw me, her voice lifted, just enough to reach across the room. "Avery!" she called, raising her glass. "Everyone, I'd like to welcome my younger sister, our family's original minimalist, a master class in making one outfit work across 4 years." Laughter. Measured. Practiced. I tilted my glass slightly. "Better to be sustainable than replaceable," I replied, calm. Her lips twitched. Just for a moment. The brunch resumed around us, but the shift in tone lingered. I moved through the room like someone browsing a museum exhibit of a life she'd been written out of. The art on the walls, the curated guest list, even the floral arrangement spoke the language of Samantha's world. Perfected, positioned, polished. At the terrace railing, I checked my phone. A text from Nina lit up the screen. "Can you step away? I need to show you something." 5 minutes later, we met in the narrow side hallway just beyond the pantry, between Samantha's office and the wine storage. Nina looked different, less like an intern, more like a woman who'd made a decision she couldn't unmake. She handed me her phone. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes weren't. "These are from the last 6 months," she said. "Internal memos, payments routed through 2 consulting names. Neither are in the Foundation's public disclosures." The screenshots showed flagged ledger entries, odd timestamps, and email threads between Samantha and the head of operations, some marked "burn after reading," others with jokes about reallocating funds for impact optics. "Did you copy them?" I asked. "I encrypted everything," Nina said. "Stored a backup offline. I know how this works. She'll say I misunderstood or that it's part of strategy, but I kept receipts." I nodded. "You didn't have to put yourself in the middle of this." "I already was," she said softly, "but at least now I'm not quiet about it." Before I could respond, Julian appeared in the hallway, his silhouette backlit by afternoon sun bleeding through frosted glass. He didn't speak right away. "You've changed," he said finally. "You used to slip into rooms like you hoped no one noticed." "I don't need to be noticed," I replied. "Everyone else entered through the red carpet. I used the brass key. The Whitestone Pavilion looked different from the service corridor. No champagne flutes, no designer gowns brushing polished tile. Just dim lighting, the steady hum of cooling vents, and the sharp scent of floor wax. Funny how the back door always seemed to show the real structure. I arrived 3 hours early. I wanted the space to recognize me, not just as a name on a deed, but as someone who belonged in its foundation. I moved through the quiet with a sense of reverence, one hand grazing the wood-paneled walls, the other tucked around the folder I had reviewed too many times to count. My first stop was the tech booth. Carl, the audio engineer, glanced up from his console. He was older, white hair tied into a low ponytail, glasses perched low on his nose. We'd spoken earlier in the week. "You ready?" he asked. I handed him the sealed envelope. "This runs after her second round of remarks. Mic feed cuts over when I step forward." He gave me a curt nod and slipped the folder into a drawer. "You got it." I moved next to the kitchen corridor and found the catering team, arranging trays of rosemary lamb bites and stacked dessert towers on wheeled racks. I offered soft thanks and gave a quiet nod to the staff. Every person here was part of tonight's reveal, even if they didn't know it yet. Upstairs, I slipped into the empty bridal prep room and stared out the narrow window. The sun had just begun to dip, casting long golden streaks across the lawn. Soon the guests would arrive, Donors, board members, local press, and half the city's society circle. And of course, Samantha, tonight's crowning jewel. I took out the brass key from my coat pocket and turned it over in my hand. It had warmed from being there. The weight of it felt different now. It no longer represented a memory. It represented choice. By the time the quartet began to play and spotlights lit the front portico, I was already positioned at the edge of the ballroom, tucked behind the velvet stage curtain. Through a slit in the drape, I watched the crowd pour in. The pavilion gleamed, crystal lighting hung like inverted chandeliers, casting rings of light onto white linen tables. Floral centerpieces towered in glass cylinders. Waiters moved like clockwork. Everything was perfect. Almost. Then she appeared. Samantha emerged from the entrance staircase in a navy silk gown, her hair swept into a side knot that framed her cheekbones like a magazine cover. She floated from table to table, her smile timed, her voice pitched with warmth that didn't thaw. The room adored her. Why wouldn't it? She'd built this world brick by image. At 8:15, she took the stage. "Welcome, everyone," she began, voice sliding across the room like poured syrup. "Tonight is more than a fundraiser. It's a celebration of legacy. When my family envisioned this space, we hoped it would become a beacon." She paused, lifted her glass, and continued. "This pavilion isn't just brick and stone. It's history. It's sacrifice. It's the embodiment of what we, as women, can create together." The crowd clapped. Samantha smiled, radiant. Then she nodded to her assistant. But before anyone else could move, I stepped out from the wings. No spotlight changed, no music flared, just one pair of quiet heels crossing the stage floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I approached the second microphone. Samantha blinked, faltered, but recovered with a tight smile. "Avery?" she said into her mic. "Not sure we had you on the program." I smiled gently. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always RSVP. The screen behind us flickered to life. Carl had done his job. A photo filled the backdrop, me and Dad in front of the pavilion, son behind us, both of us mid-laugh. His arm rested on my shoulder. Behind us, engraved in bronze, "For what you'll one day lead." Franklin J. Collins' whispers floated across the ballroom. I kept my voice even. This building was deeded to me by my father in September 2019. It was private, legal, and intentional. For years, I allowed someone else to frame the story, but tonight, I offer the correction. Carl advanced to the next slide. The deed, my name, Franklin's signature, the official state seal. It was irrefutable. I turned to face the crowd, eyes scanning familiar faces, some kind, others startled. Joanne sat in the second row, her expression unreadable, but her knuckles pale against the glass in her hand. Julian, 2 seats over, leaned forward slowly. Nina stood off stage, phone in hand, not recording, just holding space. "I'm not here to steal a spotlight," I said. "I'm here to take back the narrative. Samantha threw this event in my building, but let's be clear, it's not hers. It never was." A long beat of silence stretched. Then I stepped away from the mic and off the stage. The crowd didn't erupt. They whispered, adjusted their posture. Some avoided my gaze. Others followed me with their eyes as if seeing me for the first time. As I neared the hallway, Malik appeared beside me. He wore a charcoal gray suit, no tie, and held a thin folder beneath his arm. He didn't offer a handshake, just a low voice. "You might want to stay," he murmured, "for what happens next." The worst thing about truth, it doesn't need an invitation. By the time I poured my second cup of coffee, the headlines had already multiplied like vines on a broken fence. Collins family implodes at charity gala. Sister drops deed bombshell. Who really owns the Whitestone Pavilion? We spoke to the county clerk. Avery Collins breaks her silence and her sister's narrative. I didn't read every article. I just watched the ripple. Truth had left the ballroom and walked straight into living rooms across the city. The morning shows were relentless. Every anchor wore the same sympathetic smile, the kind people practice in elevators and mirrors, designed to seem warm but sell shock. They used phrases like stunning reveal and long-buried betrayal. One guest commentator described me as dignified but decisive. Another said I'd undermined a legacy with facts and perfectly timed silence. The irony? None of this was perfectly timed. It was just, finally. My phone buzzed. Nina. Her voice cracked when I answered. It's done. I published everything. Everything meant 3 years of internal emails, ledger anomalies, and proof of misappropriated funds from the Collins Women's Initiative. With Malik's help, she had packaged it in a file labeled Integrity Over Image, a foundation's financial report. I opened the post. It was clean, direct, impossible to misinterpret. Malik had written a one-line verification beneath it. All claims herein have been reviewed by federal oversight and confirmed for formal inquiry. It didn't roar. It landed like a gavel. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, the late morning sun pooling across the tablecloth. The flowers from last week's farmer's market had started to wilt. I made a mental note to replace them, but I didn't move. Around noon, a familiar knock came at the door. Julian. He didn't wait for me to open it. He knew the code, still remembered the way the gate buzzed when the latch clicked. I found him in the sunroom, suit slightly wrinkled, his tie abandoned somewhere between his car and here. He held a folder, slim and precise. There was a weariness around his eyes, but his voice was clear. The board met this morning. I raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. He set the folder on the ottoman between us. They voted to freeze Samantha's signatory rights. All operational authority is suspended pending formal review. They're convening again next Thursday to discuss full removal. I nodded slowly. She didn't see it coming. No, he said, because she still thought the image could outrun the truth. She's not the only one who thought that. He didn't respond right away. Then he sat beside me, not close, but not distant either. There was a time, he said, when I didn't think you'd come back from the margins. I glanced at him. I didn't. I just stopped staying there. He left the folder and walked out without asking for anything in return. I watched him go, then turned back to the window where a hawk circled high above the tree line. No noise, no audience, just steady wings against the sky. Around 3, the house phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in weeks. My mother. I let it ring twice before answering. Avery, she said, each syllable tight. You've made this uglier than it ever needed to be. I said nothing. This could have stayed in the family. I looked at the family portrait on the mantel. Samantha centered, smiling wide. My father on the end. Me, slightly turned, half out of frame. It never was, I said, and hung up. No rage, no vindication, just distance. The kind I should have claimed years ago. That evening I drove out to the cemetery. It had rained earlier, and the air still smelled of wet pine. The clouds were beginning to shift, and the light broke through in scattered beams. I passed the hedges and followed the path I knew by heart, all the way to the back row where the stones were quieter, less visited. Dad's marker was clean and understated. Franklin J. Collins, 1954 to 2020 builder, believer, father. I knelt and opened my satchel. Inside, I'd placed the original deed, folded carefully, and the brass key, still warm from my hands. I set them down gently at the base of the stone, not to leave them, just to let them touch the earth. I didn't win, I said aloud. I reclaimed. The breeze passed through the trees with a rustle that felt like acknowledgement. I stayed there for several minutes, letting the stillness speak back. Some victories don't come with applause. They come with silence. And sometimes, silence feels like home. Behind me, gravel shifted under careful steps. Julian. He stood beside the oak, envelope in hand. No suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled, and his expression was unreadable. "They want to transfer the foundation entirely under your name," he said. "Will you accept?" The envelope flapped lightly in the breeze between us. A choice, not a demand. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to answer. I didn't need applause. I needed permanence. The Whitestone Cultural Center smelled like fresh paint and possibility. It had been a month since the gala. In that time, the noise faded, first from headlines, then from whispers. The conversations moved on as they always do. But this building was just beginning again. I arrived early, slipping in through the side entrance before the final checks and speeches began. There was something sacred about being first to walk through a space meant for community. It creaked a little now. Fresh wood floors over old sublayers. The walls had been repainted a soft dove gray. Gone were the gaudy banners and gilded donor plaques. Instead, hand-painted quotes from local teens curled across the hallways. "Speak even if your voice shakes. Truth doesn't expire. You matter here." In the common room, a new mural was halfway done. The background had been laid in, deep indigo with flecks of warm gold, and empty silhouettes waited for portraits to be filled in over time. Names weren't assigned. They'd be chosen by story. Nina spotted me standing near the art room doorway. She had a clipboard tucked under one arm and a walkie clipped to her hoodie pocket. Her energy hadn't changed, but something in her posture had. She stood taller now, not out of pride, but purpose. "They're just finishing the chairs outside," she said, "and Thelma Green's here. Oh, and the kids have something for you." "Thelma's already here?" I asked. Nina grinned. She said, "I never miss a resurrection." I smiled. 30 minutes later, the courtyard behind the center was full. Kids from the surrounding neighborhoods weaved between clusters of folding chairs, handing out paper programs with art on the back. Some of the donors sat stiffly in their suits, clearly not used to events where juice boxes were passed before champagne. I liked that. Then came Mrs. Green. She walked slowly, arm-linked with a former staffer, wearing a navy pantsuit and a brooch shaped like a closed book. Her presence made people stand up a little straighter. She was 72 and still commanded a room without raising her voice. When she reached me, she pulled an old enamel badge from her pocket. It was round, rusted slightly at the edges, with faded script that read, "Whitestone Founders Circle, 1981. She pinned it onto my lapel herself. "Your father argued with me plenty," she said, "but he never stopped listening. I hope you'll do the same." I nodded. She patted my arm. "And one more thing, baby. Don't just build it, stay in it. Presence does more than policy." I barely had time to process her words when a small tug came at the edge of my blazer. I looked down to see a girl, maybe 8, holding something in her cupped hands. Her fingernails were painted 3 different colors, chipped and bright. "I made you this," she said, offering a paper star folded from an old grant flyer. "This was the first thing I ever folded that didn't fall apart." I took it gently. It was creased at the corners, but sharp and deliberate. More than a paper star, a declaration. "You know," I said, crouching down, "some of the best things are made from what almost didn't hold." Her face lit up. As the program began, I stood near the back, waiting. People spoke. Board members, city council members, youth organizers. They talked about future programs, art residencies, and workshops. Nina spoke about access. Mrs. Green reminded everyone that legacy without justice is just ego with a haircut. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the new plaque mounted under the central arch. A linen cloth hung over it, pinned lightly at each corner. I took a breath, letting the moment stretch. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted it to land without a rush. With both hands, I lifted the cloth. The brass underneath gleamed. The Whitestone Cultural Center, refounded by Avery Collins, 2024 for the forgotten, and those who remembered anyway. There was no cheer, just a silence so complete it felt like a bow from the universe. Then, slow applause, warm, earned. I stepped down without saying more. The words had already been carved. As the crowd dispersed into laughter and hugs, I slipped toward the garden path, passing the new benches carved by local woodworkers. The hydrangeas were just starting to bloom again. Julian stood near the entrance gate, his coat unbuttoned, watching me with the kind of look that didn't ask for anything. "You ready to rebuild more than buildings?" he asked. I smiled, the kind that lives more in the eyes than the mouth. "Only if it starts with peace," I said, and somehow that was already underway. Standing there with that little folded paper star in my hand, I finally understood. It was never about reclaiming power. It was about remembering where I truly belonged. Sometimes the loudest victories are the quiet ones. A child's laughter in a room once full of silence, or the gentle tap of a badge passed from one generation to the next. In life, we don't always choose the families we're born into, but we can choose what we build from the pieces they leave behind. And when we lead with truth, even fragile things can hold strong. If this story touched you in some small way, I'd love to hear what it stirred in your heart. Feel free to share your reflections or simply pass this along to someone who might need a quiet reminder that healing is possible, even after the lights fade.